Good morning and welcome to the December 17th, 2020 meeting of the Ventura County Planning Commission. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Okay. Commissioner White?
I'm here.
Commissioner Dukas? Commissioner Dukas? Are you, can you hear me? No. So.
Commissioner Adukas, can you hear us?
I have, okay, no. Okay, we're having some technical difficulty. My mic, Commissioner Dukas, can you hear me?
I'm going to ask her to unmute. There we go. Commissioner Dukas?
Commissioner Dukas, can you hear me?
Thumbs up.
Nothing. We may have to take.
Are you on Zoom, Dave?
We're all on Zoom.
How about the chat box?
Yeah, but
Maybe
we need to have
maybe you try
audio.
to call the roll?
Can we take a break while we figure? Can you hear me, Nora?
I can hear.
Saying I can hear you.
Yay, so you are here. Thank you. Commissioner McPhail? Commissioner McPhail, can you hear me? Hey. Hello. I'm going to redo roll call. Commissioner Chair.
I'm here.
Commissioner Chair. Commissioner White. Commissioner Adukas. Commissioner McPhail. Jennifer, are you unmuted on yours? Okay. Jennifer, are you muted on your screen? Okay. At the bottom? That's Jennifer. Okay, thanks. All right. Commissioner Dukas. Yay.
Here.
Commissioner McPhail.
Here.
Commissioner King.
Here.
Great, thank you.
Okay, great. We're all here. Will you all please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, great. Thank you. Now, item number 4 on the agenda is time for public comments, time set aside for comments by citizens on matters not appearing on the agenda. Are there any public comments that have come in?
No, I don't have any public comments at this time.
If we could just please read the email connection for people if they do wish to have input, either public comments or on case number 6.
All right. Welcome to the Planning Commission hearing. We will be
You're not on.
Welcome to the Planning Commission hearing. If you wish to speak publicly on item number 6, please email your comments of 250 words or less to planning.pccomments@ventura.org. That's planning.PCCOMMENTS@ventura.org. Please indicate in the subject line the agenda item number. The staff will read your comments to the Planning Commission. Anytime comments are received after the time has elapsed, they will not be read as, or be part of the record.
Okay, great, thank you. Item number 5, approval of the minutes for the meeting of December 3rd.
Move approval?
Second.
We have a motion from Commissioner Aduca, seconded by Commissioner King to approve the minutes. Any discussion on the motion? Will the clerk please call the roll?
Chair White.
Aye.
Commissioner Dukas.
Aye.
Commissioner McPhail.
Aye.
Commissioner King.
Aye.
Okay, it moves 4-0.
Okay, next item on the agenda, item number 6 is case number PL 18-0015, proposed non-coastal zoning ordinance amendments for landscaping. We have on the agenda here the Abigail Convery will be presenting this, is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, great. Abigail, you're up.
Okay. And then you could do this arrow, or you can click.
Okay, great, thank you. Good morning. I've been asked to read this slide for public comments. Good morning. I've been asked to read this slide for public comments. If you wish to make a comment on a specific case item, please email them to me. 250 words or less to the planning.pccomments@ventura.org. And on the subject line, put the agenda item number. Staff will read those comments to the Planning Commission, and all comments received after an agenda item will be made part of the record if received prior to the end of the meeting. Thank you. So I will get going. Jen, can I have a quick question? I can't see my notes.
No, I can't. Do you have a hard copy?
I do.
Why don't you grab your hard copy?
Okay, sure. All right. Before I start, I want to let you know that we have received one comment letter from the Ventura County Audubon Society that was emailed to you last night with staff responses, and that will be under Exhibit 1.
Abigail, can you please lean into the microphone a
Sure.
little more? Thank you.
Good morning, Commissioners. For the record, my name's Abigail Combry. I'm the case planner on this project and also the planning biologist for the division. Today, we'll be discussing the amendments to the landscaping standards within the non-coastal zoning ordinance. I wanted to start off with an overview of what I'll cover in this presentation, which should run about 20 minutes. I'll first discuss how this project came to be and the purpose of the amendment. I'll then review and summarize the proposed changes to the non-coastal zoning ordinance, the amendment findings to meet the requirements of the non-coastal zoning ordinance, and finally, planning staff's recommended actions for the commission. Project purpose and background. Currently, there can be up to 6 separate regulatory and guidance documents that should be referenced by planners as well as applicants if you're going to get a permit for a landscaping plan in the non-coastal zone. These documents encompass landscaping practices from 1992 to 2020, and they represent local as well as state regulations. Some of these standards are similar among the documents, and others aren't. And this is because the state and local landscaping standards have evolved over the decades, And the non-coastal zoning ordinance landscaping section hasn't been updated in over 10 years. And this has really created an unintentional and disconnected piecemeal approach to the permitting process. One of the more significant connections that are missing within the ordinance are references to the 2015 Governor's Executive Order, which updated California's Model Water Efficiency Landscape Ordinance, otherwise known as MWELO. And this was done because of the drought severity that we are experiencing then. So what happens is that when it was passed in 2015, MWELO would automatically go into effect if the locality did not have local regulations that met the standards that were set in this law. And while the local coastal program for the county was updated, the non-coastal zone automatically had the MWELO applied to all landscaping plans. The Building and Safety Division has been implementing MWELO since 2015 without it being referenced in our local planning documents. And so this myriad of factors have created an overall lack of cohesiveness across the regulatory and guidance documents, which makes it difficult for applicants and new staff members to figure out, unless they're told. To address these issues, the purpose of these proposed amendments, The purpose of these proposed amendments is to consolidate, clarify, and update the county's landscaping standards for new discretionary projects. We also wanted to clarify and reference the ordinance when MWELO water conservation laws would apply to a project. And finally, planning staff was asked by members of the Board of Supervisors at a hearing to include pollinator-friendly landscaping practices to benefit declining pollinator populations in the county. And pollinators are animals such as native bees, birds, butterflies, and even bats. The summary of the proposed ordinance amendments. So what are the major amendments proposed to the existing landscape standards? Well, to start, we first wanted to clarify to applicants and staff when a landscaping project would be subject to MWELO. We chose not to integrate the entire state MWELO code within these amendments because we wanted to avoid having to update our ordinance each time the state updates the MWELO in the future. So instead, what we outlined in the amendments is when MWELO would be applicable to a project and added references to the state MWELO code where appropriate. The second thing we did was update and incorporate the standards within the landscape design criteria document into the new landscaping section we placed in Article 6, as well as incorporating those standards associated with parking lots into the parking lot landscaping section in Article 8. We added those landscaping standards to support pollinators for discretionary projects, also in this new landscaping section in Article 6. And finally, we made minor edits to Articles 2, 7, 8, 9, and 11, which consisted of edits such as standardizing the definitions between MWELO and the non-coastal zoning ordinance, formatting, corrections to formatting, and other references throughout the throughout the ordinance to reference this new section. So, for example, in Exhibit 3, when you see the wireless facilities or oil and gas, or it's just providing references to the new landscaping section. It's not changing anything associated with those topics. The purpose of the new section, general landscaping and water conservation requirements in this Article 6, is to centralize the general landscaping standards in one place in the ordinance as much as possible. The subsections that I've highlighted in red contain most of the new standards associated with this amendment. The remaining subsections in green consist mostly of minor alterations and updates to existing standards that were moved either from other sections of the ordinance or the landscape design criteria document. And because I'm focusing on the new material of this amendment, if anyone has questions associated with these sections that I'm not covering, there's a more detailed explanation within the staff report, as well as in Exhibit 3 for the legislative version of the text. Okay. The applicability section is the first section within the general landscaping requirements, and we wanted to really outline what's required of landscaping projects that are subject to these new standards and clarify when MWILO is applicable to a project. So first, the new section will only apply to discretionary development projects that require landscaping, which includes commercial, industrial, residential plan development, and residential high-density zones. They will only apply to discretionary projects that are subject to MWILO and projects that are subject to parking lot landscaping standards, and those will be limited to subsections in this 810682 that includes requirements for landscape plan submissions, landscape maintenance plans, and then the general landscaping standards. And in addition, if manufactured slopes are proposed within a parking lot, it will also be subject to the subsection of manufactured slopes, which was actually moved from the landscape design criteria. The applicability section also clarifies when a ministerial or a discretionary project would be subject to MWILO, and this would include projects that have greater than 500 square feet, new projects, projects 2,500 square feet or more if they're retrofits, as well as cemeteries. And finally, discretionary development projects that require permanent irrigation will be subject to the basic irrigation standards in MWILO Appendix D. And this is because the MWILO has replaced the water efficiency standards that originally was in the landscape design criteria. So if a project is not subject to MWILO, there would be no water conservation standards associated with it. So that's why. So when do the standards in the new section in MWILO not apply to a project, or when can those requirements be modified? Well, first, because the new section only provides standards to when landscaping is installed, and it doesn't require landscaping. The section doesn't apply if landscaping is not required in other sections of the ordinance or if MWILO does not apply to the project. And as I mentioned on the previous slide, this section will only apply to discretionary projects and not ministerial projects. In addition, it allows for modifications to the requirements if an applicant cannot meet those standards due to practical difficulties or undue hardship, provided that they are the minimum necessary. And then we also clarified when state MWILO does not apply to a project based on the code itself. The general landscaping section contains the standards that support basic landscaping practices, such as requiring that planting beds are designed to group plants by similar water, sun, soil requirements. And that's going to significantly help with installed landscaping dying over time because of incompatible conditions for all the plants in the planting bed. The standards also address the use of mulch to ensure that mulch is used to support plantings and not be proposed as the predominant landscape material. And this can result in aesthetically displeasing landscaping or increased temperatures in the surrounding environment, otherwise known as the heat island effect. We also have added new standards to support the long-term survival of existing mature oaks. And these include basic guidance for landscaping under oaks, such as ensuring that there's compatible plantings and they're installed as accents and not complete ground cover so that they don't compete for resources over time with the oak. and ensuring that the installation of those landscaping materials underneath these mature oaks are set back a safe distance from the trunk. There are also standards that encourage the selection and installation of larger growing and native trees when it's possible. And that's because they do more to help with a wide range of services such as carbon sequestration, reduce stormwater runoff, and increase property values and enhance the attractiveness of a community. And finally, we provided setback distances for landscaping and its adjacent infrastructure, such as like requiring a 20-foot setback from power lines, or rather than having a tree well, which is either in a sidewalk or between curbs. The current ordinance sets it in 3x3. We changed that so that it was actually sized according to the size of the tree that was placed there. Okay, pollinator-friendly landscape standards. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we were asked to incorporate pollinator-friendly standards into this update by the Board of Supervisors, and it's really come at the right time. There's been an alarming trend of pollinator populations crashing here in the county. For example, in winter of 2018 to 2019, the western monarch butterfly population that overwinters in California plummeted to fewer than 30,000 monarchs, which represents a single-year drop of 86% and a drop of over 99% since the 1980s. And this year, early counts at historical overwintering sites have counted fewer than 2,000 monarchs in the entire state of California. Unfortunately, they've also seen this trend that has been seen across most of the butterfly species in the state that are being monitored. So the need for supporting pollinators with our landscaping is more important than ever. And I believe that we're gonna have a commenter later from Xerces to talk about that a little bit more. The pollinator-friendly standards within the proposed amendment are based upon proven landscaping practices used to support pollinator diversity as well as their numbers. And we've included additional guidelines that have been placed in a pollinator-friendly brochure that will be made available to the public from the county's website, and you can find it in Exhibit 4. I want to also clarify that it's the same information in Exhibit 4 for the two brochures. One is for the planning counter or trifold, and the other one is for the web. First, to get back to the standards, we wanted to ensure that native plant species are integrated into the landscape design. And this is because studies show that the greater area of native vegetation within the landscape, the greater the pollinator numbers and diversity. To do this, we propose that native plants make up at least 50% of the plant palette. We also have introduced a new incentive that will promote the retention of existing native vegetation in landscape areas. And I'm going to talk about this a little bit more on the next slide. The second standard encourages the use of plants that provide pollinator nesting or larval habitat as shelter, as well as shelter. And residents and applicants can find a list of these plants through online resources posted by Xerces and the California Native Plant Society, as well as Audubon, as we've recognized in the comment letter that was sent. And there also can be found referenced in the pollinator-friendly brochure. So, to ensure nectar and pollen resources are available throughout the year for pollinators to raise their young, have energy for migration, or just to overwinter in Ventura County, we included a standard that would require a minimum of 8 or more different plant species in the plant palette that have consecutive or overlapping bloom periods. And this would provide pollinators in the county 2 to 3 different plant types available per season. So that would be spring, summer, and then our fall and winter seasons. The amendment would not allow for the installation of invasive or watch list plant species, as well as the tropical milkweed plant. Tropical milkweed was prohibited because it transmits a really debilitating parasite to the western monarch butterflies, which may also be another factor that contributes to their decline. And then, though you don't see it on this slide, within the landscape maintenance section, we also encourage the use of non-toxic methods of pest control. And finally,
May I ask a question?
huh?
May I ask a question?
Oh, please.
Chair White, may I ask a question?
Yes, go ahead,
Oh,
Commissioner Dukas.
Okay. We received last night a letter suggesting that instead of 8 or greater plant species, that it be 9. And could you explain why 8 and not 9, the way that you did in the response, so that people can hear if they're listening?
sure. Well, it's as far as guidance is concerned, I think that these factors range. Sometimes it's recommended 5 to 8, or as many as you, or 5 to 9, as many as you can fit in. The guidance that we used had suggested 8. Obviously, the more the better, but we were a little concerned about all of the requirements that were placed based on MWILO. There were landscaping requirements and other area plans. And so when we reviewed these past landscaping plans that were submitted to the county, we settled on 8, as well as the 50% of native vegetation, because we thought that that would be more achievable for applicants coming in.
Okay. I just, I've had some recent experience with, I wouldn't say I'm growing them. I have cleared mustard and thistle, and the seed bank in the ground, offered up native plants, and they come in succession. Like the earliest ones in the year, what I noticed are fiddlenecks, and then those make way for a plant that's everlasting, and then a California fuchsia, and then a long stem buckwheat, and then a Spanish clover, and the plants make their appearance, and then depending on whether they're a wildflower or baseous or whatever, certain things stay, like coyote brush or California sagebrush, and other things come and go. But it's certain ones play together, they grow together naturally well, and I think that trying to prescribe too much might get in the way of their delicate balance, and how they can grow in the same area over time in succession.
That's very true. And I think that that was really the intent. And you're talking about, I think, natural regeneration that's associated with your landscaping. And I think in particular, we were really targeting the installed landscaping, but based on the analysis that I had also done, that 8 seemed to be an appropriate number based on some of those databases that I had mentioned for the California Native Plant Society, or CRCs. There, you can really plot and find out which plants have similar requirements, soil, moisture requirements, and so I would agree with that as well, and that was a major consideration.
Thank you.
Thank you. So finally, these requirements can also be modified if there's logistical issues, whether it's unique environmental conditions on the site or a smaller landscape area that makes it more difficult to comply with these regulations. And one of the newer concepts we are bringing forward is the proposed incentive that would allow an applicant to retain an existing unprotected native plant community or an actual individual mature plant that already exists on the site that would qualify or count towards meeting the minimum percentage of landscaping that may be required for a land use, such as industrial or commercial, some of those land uses I mentioned earlier. And the landscape credit would be granted at a 1-to-1 base ratio, which is 1 square foot of the retained native vegetation and its surrounding root zone would count for 1 square foot of the landscape area that's required. The ratio can also be increased to 2-to-1, where 2 square feet of required landscape area would count if 1 square foot of existing native vegetation was preserved when those areas are located near streams or wetlands, within the habitat connectivity and wildlife corridor, or adjacent to native vegetation patches that are greater than 2,000 feet. And finally, we incorporated a standard that would allow the planning director to have the ability to adjust the amount of the credit that was used to ensure that the purpose of the overall landscaping standards were met. So for example, someone comes in and says, hey, you know, I have all of this coastal sage scrub and I want to keep it for landscaping, but it's not necessarily, for example, screening the land use, then the director would have the ability to come in and say, you should install X, Y, Z. One other thing that I wanted to note is that, you know, that this program in particular is really good for retaining the established native vegetation for pollinators, but also the applicant's going to save significant cost as far as installation and irrigation requirements down the line. What's neat about this is that they would also be required to maintain these areas as they do with traditional landscaping, which is also according to the landscape maintenance section. Okay. Just a minute. Permit modifications. A new customer-friendly mechanism we are proposing is for applicants who want to make simple, straightforward modifications to a previously approved landscape plan using a ministerial zoning clearance without having to apply for the more time-intensive and costly permit modification. And I think a good example of this would be someone who comes in and wants to replace a plant type in an area where it didn't do well for some reason, whether it was too sunny or the soil conditions were not good. We don't, you know, or they could just come in and want to replace it for better water conservation. And so we don't want to make them go through the discretionary permit modification for something that's good for everyone and meets the basic criteria we have listed here. So a ministerial zoning clearance could be approved when it's not, the substitution of those materials are not subject to MWLO. The original intent of the land use entitlement is not violated, such as landscape screening or stormwater management. And the environment isn't negatively affected, such as site drainage patterns, the health of required or existing trees, introducing native or watch list species, or increasing overall water usage. And to wrap this up, on page 7, the Planning Commission staff report, it states that staff finds the ordinance amendments exempt from CEQA according to sections 15061, B3, 15307, and 15308, because the ordinance will benefit the county's natural resources and it will not cause a negative environmental impact. So the zoning ordinance amendment findings, you'll also find on pages 8 to 10 of the staff report. The findings are required for the ordinance amendment. And we have listed how those, this particular amendment really supports public health and safety and general welfare. They represent good zoning practices, and the proposed amendments are consistent with the Ventura County General Plan. And finally, our recommended actions. Planning staff asks that your commission take the recommended actions shown here on pages 11 and 12 of your staff report. Any questions?
I have a question.
Okay, Commissioner Dukas, you have the floor.
We're regarding the letter from the Ventura Audubon Society.
Yes.
Were there suggestions made that you agree are appropriate and can be included in our update?
Well, I know that, and let me pull that up for reference, but I know that we talked about incorporating a number of them into the Pollinator-Friendly brochure. And I think that the concern is really adding additional requirements when there are so many different landscape requirements currently.
I was looking for the answer of which of their suggestions could be incorporated in case anyone is listening.
Oh, okay. Yeah, hold on just a moment.
Okay. I'm looking for the yes.
I'm sorry, what?
I'm looking for the yes.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yes, we would incorporate a number of those suggestions into the Pollinator-Friendly brochure as well. Some of the standards that they had pointed out, for example, in number 5 and 6, they're already covered in the standards that we've proposed. Number 5, which talks about providing 5% of the landscape area exposed to ground without weed fabric or mulch. This is already in our pollinator brochure, but it's also proposed in MWILO itself. And then the number 6, where they talk about requiring at least 6 different types of plants, are what we're proposing in our pollinator-friendly guidelines is actually 8. So I think those are covered, but we'd be happy to definitely include suggestions that aren't there within the brochure.
Thank you for that clarification.
Do any other commissioners have questions? Commissioner King, you have the floor.
Thank you. Ms. Convery, these are things that we talked about, but I just want to put them on the record, and they don't really apply to things that are being adopted in the amendments that are carried forward in the ordinance, but just stuff that stuck with me. One was that I asked if the landscape design criteria document would be repealed or go away if the board adopts these incorporated changes into the non-coastal zoning ordinance. And it seemed to me the answer was sort of and not sort of, because they're still referred to by Public Works in some of their stuff. And the intent here is to simplify, collect, and bring everything together. And yet, here we have another, I shouldn't hesitate to use the word bureaucratic glitch that hangs on to old stuff, even though it would make more sense to get, to just do it all at once. And I realize that the Resource Management Agency is comprised of pieces and we can only deal with our piece. But, just to make my editorial comment that, hanging on to some of this stuff is at cross purposes to what we're trying to accomplish here. And you don't need to respond to that. That was just an editorial comment. We discussed on, and I'm not sure it's page 12 or page 13. And again, I realize that 8106 8.27 is not really something that we're changing. We're just bringing it over from the design criteria document. But just one of my, pet peeves, and I think section E, it refers to slopes less than 3 feet created by deposition of material. And, not being a really smart environmental or landscape guy, I couldn't understand for the life of me what that meant until you and I discussed it. What it really means is a small artificial berm. And wouldn't it be easier, in keeping with our goal, to just describe it as an artificial berm? I mean, most people could kind of understand that. And secondly, in the same section, it talks about less than 5 feet created by an excavation of material. I think that's really just 5 feet of cut bank. Now, wouldn't cut bank be easier to understand than excavated material? I mean, I'm sorry, but these are just, seems to me, simple things that would make this readable for the average Joe like me who isn't real versed in this engineering stuff. And I don't mean to bag on engineers. Our chair, would certainly be an exception to my comments.
Your comment is duly noted.
And I think you answered all of my other questions, but I just couldn't let the opportunity to not make editorial comments pass by, since I'm not an expert in the field like my colleagues, Commissioner Adukas and Commissioner McPhail are. Did I mispronounce it again?
No, I'm not purporting to be any kind of expert at all.
Well, you're smarter than I am. Anyway, that's all I had.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner King. Commissioner McPhail, you have the floor.
Yes. First of all, I'd like to thank Tricia for getting back to me after 6 o'clock your time in California. And she answered several of my questions very well, and I really appreciate that. But I still have a couple of concerns. On page 4 of the staff report, I noticed in the response to the Audubon Society, they did reference that the Department of Pesticide Regulation and the Ag Commissioner have authority over pesticide use in Ventura County. I think I'd like that incorporated into that last sentence in 8106-8.2.3, number 4. Then that way that clarifies it for everybody. Just a reference to those two agencies. And I think that would clarify to anybody what we're trying to do here. Then actually in the non-coastal zone ordinance itself, on page 12, section 8107-5.6.24, it talks about landscaping screening for oil and gas. I think that needs to really be relooked at, because you're not going to hide anything with the type of native plants that you want people to use. And I understand that, but requiring them to landscape with native plants to the best of their ability, you're still not going to hide an oil or gas pump. And so I think that one's a little overzealous and overstepping. On page 13, section 8107-35.3.2, I'm still not clear, and it's not Tricia's fault, about the 600-foot buffer. Is the 600-foot buffer on the property to be landscaped, or are they talking about 600-foot buffer on the other side of somebody's property? That's a question.
That particular standard is for botanical gardens. And what it's saying, and that's existing text. Is there feedback happening?
I'm sorry, you're breaking up. I can't understand you.
Hello?
Yeah. Commissioner McPhail, possibly if you mute for a moment on your end, that might
Yeah,
help.
she's muted. Okay. That particular buffer distance is existing text, and it was put in place for botanical gardens. And they're talking about that if there's non-native plants that they're using, that it's possible that there should be a 600-foot buffer between that and our native landscapes, our native communities.
Okay, thank you. Next, page 14, section 8107-45.3 has to do with wireless sites. Instead of referencing again from another ordinance all the requirements to cite a wireless site, I think you just need to reference whatever section number that is in that ordinance. You don't need to list all of those other things. To me, it gets kind of confusing. Which ordinance am I supposed to be abiding by here? Why do I need to know how many square feet a wireless thing can be, how high it can be? That doesn't concern me. I just want to be concerned about landscaping it. I think you just need to reference it. You don't need to list the whole part of that ordinance.
And maybe Jacqueline can jump in here. We were asked to include the entire section that we were amending.
Yeah, this is Jacqueline Smith from the County Counsel's Office. Commissioner, this is existing language from the current NCZO that's copied into the revisions here and that reflect what's being updated. So this is part of the existing NCZO document.
I understand that, but why can't it just be referenced? Why does it have to be spelled out all over again? It'd be in two separate places, two separate ordinances. That's my point. Okay, page 7. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, just so that I understand your question, which I think there's only one ordinance at issue, which is the non-coastal zoning ordinance. So there shouldn't be two ordinances. There's just the one. And this document reflects what changes are being made to that one ordinance.
Yeah, you're right. I apologize for that. But still, the section about citing a wireless site is in a different part of that ordinance, right? It's not under landscaping.
That's correct.
So that's my point. It should just reference back to that section of the non-coastal zoning ordinance that refers to citing of a wireless site. To me, it's verbiage that just extends this part of the ordinance that really doesn't need to be there. But that's my opinion.
Okay, thank you.
Page 17, section 8108-4.8.1. There again, I'm sure reduction in parking spaces is in another part of the ordinance, and that has nothing to do with the landscaping of a parking lot or whatever. There again, the cut back on verbiage, it just could be referenced back to the ordinance section that deals with parking spaces. Page 27, 8109-1.3.4, 2C. I'm going to be contacting Ed Williams at the Ag Commissioner's office, because when I was the Ag Commissioner, we had 300-foot buffer, period, regardless of what kind of vegetative buffer they may have or whatever other kind of buffer they have. And that worked really well with fumigation and stuff. So I'll deal with the Ag Commissioner's office on that one. But 150 feet has shown to be not adequate in my past history. And that's all the comments I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner McPhail. Any other commissioners have comments?
Chair White,
Yeah, go ahead.
could we get responses to the substantive issues that Commissioner McPhail regarding the 150 versus the 300 and the repetition? Could we get staff response to those points?
I don't know the answer to that. When we get into deliberations, I think we should put together a motion that incorporates our thinking. What?
Could I get either Ms. Meyer's response or Mr. Ward's response to those points, please?
Okay.
Chair White.
Chair White, sorry.
Commissioner.
Go ahead.
Chair White, members of the commission.
Can't hear.
I was muted, sorry. For the record, I'm Tricia Meyer. I'm the Long Range Planning Manager.
There we go.
The volume off? Or use that. Just turn it down.
Whoa.
But am I unmuting this? I'm sorry, I don't know. And try again. I don't.
That won't pick up through the Zoom. She's got to talk through here, correct?
Is this going to?
Turn your volume up on your Surface Pro.
Volume's off. The mic through the Surface Pro.
And then you're going to use the mic that she was talking into.
Okay, then you're good.
You want me to speak into this mic?
Yes.
Okay.
To make sure that. You're up. Okay, good.
All right, well, I'll test this out. I'm Tricia Meyer. I'm the Long Range Planning Manager for the Ventura County Planning Division. Hopefully everyone can hear me. I wanted to go ahead and respond to a few of the comments from Commissioner McPhail. Starting from the top, I understood his comment to be that he would like us to incorporate into the staff report a reference to the fact that pesticides are regulated by both the Ag Commissioner and by the state of California, which we can certainly do. It's not something that we have the authority to regulate in our non-coastal zoning ordinance, which was what was reflected in the comments back to the letter we received yesterday from the Audubon Society. The next comment, I believe, was related to the oil and gas screening and the screening of those. And so that is actually something that we paid very careful attention to when we worked on these ordinance amendments. And you'll notice that this is actually existing text in the non-coastal zoning ordinance that was amended to allow for, there was already a requirement for screening, but the language was changed such that the screening is now to the maximum extent feasible as determined by the planning director or his or her designee.
So at this point in time, there isn't a requirement that the full facility be screened, but rather that to the extent feasible, it be screened. And the requirement, the initial requirement for screening had already been in the ordinance. And so there were some revisions to that language. So I just wanted to point that out to all of you. The next question was in relation to the reference to a 600-foot buffer for botanical gardens. And again, this was text that was already in the non-coastal zoning ordinance. If someone was coming in with a botanical garden, then they would be required to, on the site of the botanical garden, not on the neighboring site or the surrounding properties, but on the site of the botanical garden, they would have to create a buffer zone of 600 feet. And that's just to prevent any encroachment of the non-native species into the natural areas. The text that we revised there really was very minor. We took out the word irrigated and we added the words native species to non-native species. So that was a very minor edit that was done as part of these non-coastal zoning ordinance amendments. Moving forward, I think that the other questions were really in relation to the fact that it feels like we're duplicating text. Especially if you go to the parking section or to the wireless section and we're talking about FCC regulations and things of that nature. And I think I just want to reiterate that we're not actually duplicating those unrelated standards into the landscape section of the non-coastal zoning ordinance. We are simply showing them in a format that's understandable rather than bringing the entire non-coastal zoning ordinance to the Planning Commission. And so we were asked to include sections of the ordinance that show where we're making even minor revisions, and that's the legislative format where you see the cross out and the underline for the new text. And so in most cases, when you look at those sections that are in Exhibit 3 of your Planning Commission staff report packet, what you're seeing is that we've removed references to the landscape design criteria, and we've replaced that with a reference to the new section for landscaping in the non-coastal zoning ordinance. And so that's the 8106, I think, 8.2. So there is no duplication. We're not trying to make this a longer document. Rather, this is just simply an effort to show you in a form that's understandable, okay, this is the context in which we are making this minor edit. I think that addresses, all of the issues that I understood.
Thank you, and that helps me with clarity in my mind.
Thank you, Tricia.
Okay, great. Thank you, Tricia. And Commissioners, any other questions from commissioners? I can't read that. What's it say?
Does this show at all?
Yeah.
Does this show at all that those are plants?
Barely.
Something.
Rats. I just, then you're just going to have to take my word for it. I was rattling off the plants that grew, and I forgot to mention slender tarweed, milkweed, branching phacelia. All of these things grew together in succession, but this gets back to the suggestion from the Audubon Society. And it just reminds me of something that John Denver once said. He said, you don't have to do everything, but you can do something. And I think that that's what these guidelines show, that we're doing something. And I think we can be really proud of it. And I'm very impressed with the amount of work that went into this, and the care and the effort that went into it. I'm very impressed and pleased.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Dukas. I'll make some comments. This subject is very near and dear to my heart. Being a member of the California Native Plant Society, the Santa Barbara Botanical Gardens, the Ventura Botanical Gardens. I'm actually on the board. I'm on the board of Channel Islands Restoration, whose mission is to revegetate the Channel Islands with native plants to provide habitat for invertebrates and vertebrates, including birds. I'm also associated with Xerces, which starts with an X, which is whose mission is invertebrate conservation. Invertebrates including insects and worms and things that don't have backbones. I would agree with Commissioner Aducas in commending the staff for moving this forward. I'm very impressed to see our county pushing this idea in the development of the county to provide native plants and habitat for animals of all kinds. I do have some minor suggestions for revisions when we get into deliberations. I would like to present that, having to do with expanding beyond encouraging pollinators. Certainly, we all love pollinators, but there are lots of other invertebrates and vertebrates that are important that need to be taken into account. I would like to expand this a little bit. When we get into deliberations, I'll present my thought on that. But again, yeah, I would agree that the staff is to be commended for pulling this together, and I'm proud of my county for encouraging landscaping with native plants and making habitat for all the different kinds of animals that exist here in California. Any other comments from commissioners? I know we have, I have one speaker card here, so do we have somebody on Zoom or? Okay, so let's bring that person in. Emma, is it?
Pelton.
Pelton. Emma?
Hi, this is Emma Pelton. Thank you very much for letting me speak. I'm here as a staff person of the Xerces Society, which was just mentioned, so I'm glad you're associated with us. We are an invertebrate conservation nonprofit, and I would like to speak on behalf of Xerces to voice my support for the proposed pollinator-friendly landscape standards. These standards are more important than ever as we see an increasing loss of insects in our landscapes and communities. And as Abby mentioned, a particularly striking example of this is the monarch butterfly, which has declined by over 99.9%, and just this week was declared a candidate species by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So these pollinator-friendly landscape standards will help address some of the key threats that monarchs face: a loss of native habitat, the use of pesticides, and the disease and behavior concerns associated with tropical milkweed. We know that part of the solution for monarchs is planting and retaining native plants, especially native milkweed and nectar plants that bloom throughout the season, as has been discussed, and reducing reliance on pesticides, particularly insecticides, as well as prohibiting tropical milkweed. We encourage the County of Ventura to adopt these standards in order to help provide more room in our landscapes for monarchs, as well as other native butterflies, bees, and wildlife species to thrive. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. We appreciate hearing from you. Are there any other emails or Zoom people who want to comment on this?
No, I have no other speakers lined up.
Okay, hearing none, we'll close the public hearing and begin commissioner deliberations. I guess I could start. No, go ahead, Commissioner McPhail. Your hand is waving. I'll recognize you.
Just like the ditto, staff did a really great job on this. And once again, I'd like to thank Tricia for getting back to me. And I thought Abigail did a very good presentation. Thank you.
Commissioner King, you have the floor.
Thank you. I'll keep my remarks brief. I I concur with my colleague Commissioner McPhail. I want to particularly commend staff on the balanced approach they have brought to this subject. And I'm an advocate that in ordinances that we exert the lightest touch possible to achieve the benefit we need for the community at large. And I think this, this proposed change in the ordinance accomplishes that in spades. I thought the response to the Audubon letter was right on point. I think that putting the effort into the brochure rather than embedding it in hard and fast rules in the statute beyond what we need is the right approach to get folks to want to do the things that we know are a good idea, like advancing pollinator plants and advancing the benefit of the community of pollinators. I think that's the right way to go about it. Otherwise, we wind up with ordinances that are so dense that nobody but a landscape architect can really even begin to understand them. So kudos to staff for, I think, a beautiful job here. And finally, and it was already mentioned by the last speaker, I find it ironic that almost the same week or a week after, I read an article in the LA Times that talked about U.S. Fish and Wildlife acknowledging that the monarch butterfly ought to be listed, ought to be a candidate for listing. They use the excuse that, well, but we just don't have enough money to include them right now. And what a sad statement of affairs that little old Ventura County can find a way to try and advance what is good for humanity and not be confined by budgetary constraints. So, here's a guy that doesn't think regulations ought to be heavy-handed, but applauds the fact, and Commissioner Educas said it beautifully when she quoted a musician that we can't do everything, but we can do something. And that was a quote that belongs in this discussion. So thank you very much, Commissioner Educas. That's all I have.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner King. Okay, I would like to make my suggestion, and it has to do with broadening the encouragement beyond pollinator-friendly gardening. And I say that because, Ventura County, let's talk about insects, has between 3,000 and 4,000 species of insects, and some of those are pollinators, most of them are not. Those insects are food for each other. They're food for lizards and birds and bats. All of these animals, these invertebrates, need to be encouraged in call it native landscaping. Xerces and Audubon have both addressed this issue and encourage native plants and landscaping techniques that encourage more than just pollinators. So if we could put my suggested language revision up there, it's very modest. I'm hoping that all the other commissioners will agree to it. It has to do with section 8106-8.23, general landscaping standards. And the way that section reads now is it's an encouragement. It's not a mandate. And I'll read it the way it's written in the proposed text. The use of native host plants for butterfly and moth caterpillars is strongly encouraged. And of course, that is to be encouraged, but there's more that should be encouraged. And so I would add the use of native host plants for butterfly and moth caterpillars, and native plants and landscape features which create habitat for other beneficial invertebrates and vertebrates, including birds, is strongly encouraged. And the reason I'm suggesting this is I think that who's going to be looking at this section in the non-coastal zoning ordinance are landscape architects and designers. And I would like them to see these words that encourage more than just pollinators. We want more than just pollinators in our gardens. Further, the second sentence in that section says, Ventura County Pollinator-Friendly Guidelines lists native and host plants for pollinators and recommendations for other pollinator-friendly landscape design practices. And that is that the county pollinator-friendly guidelines is really good. I don't fault it. I just think it needs to be expanded a little bit to include what Xerces, and I'll remind you, Xerces is an organization that promotes conservation of invertebrates, including insects and every kind of invertebrate you can think of. And as does Audubon. Audubon's interest is primarily birds, but not just birds. So what I would like to have that read is the Ventura County Pollinator-Friendly Guidelines, and then add Xerces and Audubon, provide lists of native and host plants for pollinators and other beneficial invertebrates, and recommendations for other pollinator-friendly, beneficial invertebrate-friendly, and vertebrate-friendly landscape design practices. And I think with these changes that a competent landscape architect or designer will hopefully look to what Audubon and Xerces have suggested and hopefully do a little bit better job in the design of landscapes. So that's the one change I would like to make. Otherwise, I would agree to approve it as presented with the changes that Tricia acknowledged could be incorporated from the Audubon comments and from Commissioner McPhail's comments.
Chair White, if I can just ask a clarification. On the second paragraph on the screen, I'm not sure what section you want that edit to go. I see the first paragraph I found, but where is the second paragraph going? Is it a new paragraph under D2, or is it another area because you've added edits? I'm just not sure where that second paragraph is going.
Huh. Well, that's a good question.
And maybe I can ask the question to staff too.
I didn't make that up, so was there a previous version that included that second sentence?
Yes. So in fact, that would be still part of D2. Because that particular section is made up of essentially two components.
Okay.
And you have just expanded on those components, but it's all within D2.
Okay. So that helps. Thank you, Abigail. So if this does move forward in your motion as the commission deliberates, then it would be for everything that's shown on the slide as part of D2.
Can I make one comment?
Okay. Go ahead.
Did you want to leave out the California Native Plant Society?
I think that'd be great to put it in there. You know, with respect to preservation of animals, their California Native Plant Society doesn't particularly take on the mission of animals, whereas Xerces and Audubon do. That's why I limited it to them.
Yeah.
But I'm happy to include them as well.
I apologize. The only reason why I suggested that is that they have an amazing database that's actually linked to providing site-specific native plants, as well as it's also linked to local pollinators. So you can actually see which plants go to those local pollinators.
Okay, so do you think my suggestion here, Abigail, is a good idea?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And I would add her suggestion to add California Native Plant Society guidelines. Okay, now I see a waving hand, Commissioner McPhail.
Yeah, I don't have a problem per se with your changes, Chair White, but I do have a problem specifically naming different organizations. I think that should be in the pamphlet. That should not be in the ordinance, because tomorrow, 10 different organizations to say, how come we're not listed in the ordinance? My feeling is Xerces and Audubon and the Native Plant Society, they should be in that brochure, not in the ordinance itself.
Okay, and I understand that, and they are in there in the Pollinator-Friendly guidelines. There is the reference to Xerces and Audubon, and my reasoning for including it in the zoning ordinance itself is because I don't think everybody's probably going to be looking in the footnotes of the county's Pollinator-Friendly guidelines. But to highlight it in the zoning ordinance, I think it just calls their attention to it. I think it's important to put there just from that standpoint that they may not look at it if it's in a footnote of a guideline. Any other comments from commissioners? Commissioner A. Dukas.
Yeah, I would just like to say good catch, Chair White, because one thing I noticed with my limited experience with this is that if you plant it, they will come. And it's not just monarchs that visit the native milkweed here. It's aphids, which are food for other insects. So once you have these native plants like doveweed, it's amazing how many different invertebrates just find their way, Ackman blue butterflies and all sorts of things that I never observed before. So this is something that more fully expresses the goal. And I think it's interesting that you have this background and that you can provide us with this language that I think could be inserted in and just give a more full and clearer picture of what we're trying to do.
Great. Well, thank you on that. Excuse me, Commissioner King. Let me make a comment, and then I'll call on you. I think that the guidelines calling for, or the zoning ordinance calling for a plant palette of 8 native plant species, or as the Audubon Society suggested, 9. Both 8 and 9 are very modest numbers when you look at the many native plants in California. one of my wife and one of the things my wife and I like to do is go to the Santa Barbara Botanic Gardens and buy native plants when they have their native plant sale. And we just went there and bought some milkweed, narrow leaf milkweed, which is the good kind of milkweed. I was just sitting here earlier when they were talking about the 8 or 9 species and looking and thinking about what's in our yard in Ojai. We have, I don't know exactly how many native plant species, but it's between 25 and 30. Flowering plants and succulents and trees. Any rate, I agree with Commissioner Dukas. Plant them and they'll come. We have a yard full of butterflies and bees, wild bees. It's incredible to watch. Commissioner King, you were waving previously. You have the floor.
Thank you. Again, I compliment the chair on addressing the invertebrate issue. I agree with Commissioner McPhail, however, that specifically listing 2 or 3 organizations in the ordinance when they're already mentioned in the brochure goes beyond what I'm comfortable with. I would support the changes without those specific organizations being addressed in the ordinance. I have no problem addressing them in the brochure.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner McPhail.
Yeah, this question for Director Ward, is there any other, I can't remember, but is there any other sections of the non-coastal ordinance where specific organizations are listed?
Commissioner McPhail, I'm taking a little head count here with my managers too, trying to quickly think if there's any other reference of organizations in the NCZO. And off the top of our heads, the 2 managers and I don't believe so. Abigail, do you think there is something? Please step forward.
I would say that it's not mentioned in the NCZO, but it is in the general plan, as well as the local coastal program. No, but we do reference as far as reviews for specific organizations in the Santa Monica Mountains.
But they're not in the non-coastal zone ordinance.
No, so we don't believe in the non-coastal zoning ordinance that we have those listings, correct?
Okay, I just want to state that I'm in total favor of the ordinance as was presented, but I can't vote for it if specific organizations are listed in the ordinance. I just don't think that's right, because there's other organizations out there that are going to come back and say, how come we're not listed? Well, we can list you in the brochure.
Okay, I would like to respond to that. I can count votes, and I would like to see this move forward. May I suggest changing the language of my motion, not really a motion, my suggestion, and eliminate Xerces and Audubon and say other instead of Xerces and Audubon, so that a landscape architect's encouraged to go beyond the pollinator-friendly guidelines. Would that get your votes?
I can agree with that, Commissioner White.
Okay.
And if Commissioner McPhail agrees, I won't be the stumbling block here to moving forward with this.
I'm sorry, would you repeat that, Commissioner King?
Yeah, I won't be the lone wolf that stands in the way with that change.
Okay, so we'll change Xerces and Audubon to other and others. Provide lists. Does that make sense to everybody?
No, Xerces and Audubon need to be taken out,
Yes,
not mentioned in the ordinance.
correct. Okay, so
we-
I think that's understood. Now, what about the other suggestions that Audubon made that Tricia addressed to incorporate, and suggestions from Commissioner McPhail? Director Ward, you want to answer that?
I'm sorry. I apologize. We were making sure we got the language on that last one. Could you restate that, Commissioner McPhail? I apologize.
Basically, I have no problem with the second sentence as long as Xerces and Audubon are taken out.
Yes. I will have Mayor read it back to everyone.
So what I have written currently is the Ventura County Pollinator-Friendly Guidelines and other organizations list native and host plants for pollinators and other beneficial invertebrates, and recommendations for other pollinator-friendly, beneficial invertebrate-friendly, and vertebrate-friendly landscape design practices.
Everybody like that? A straw vote? Okay. Now, my question has to do with the other comments that Commissioner McPhail in particular brought up. Are we going to incorporate some of these into what we move forward with today?
I can comment on that as well. So most of the comments were related to the duplication of information that was perceived to be occurring. And as I tried to reflect in my response, there is no real duplication that's occurring. And as far as, there were questions that Commissioner McPhail asked and we answered about what the 600-foot buffer was on the botanical gardens. But there was one comment which was related back to Section 8106-8.2.8, the landscape maintenance section of the proposed regulations, which states that non-toxic methods of pest control within landscape areas are strongly encouraged. And in that, I think what we can do is we can add to the staff note an explanation that the Planning Division is preempted by the California Department of Pesticide Regulations from, eliminating all pesticide use. We actually can't regulate pesticide use in our non-coastal zoning ordinance, so that's something that we can add in. We can also add in the reference to the Ag Commissioner as the one who then regulates pesticide use in the county, which Commissioner McPhail requested.
Okay, Commissioner McPhail, anything else you want to add to that?
Well, not to that, but the 600-foot buffer is 2 football fields long. That's really limiting someone who wants to put in a botanical garden, the amount of space that they're going to have. And that's my only concern is the 600 foot. I understand trying to keep non-native species out and that sort of thing, but 600 foot is 2 football fields lengths, and that's quite a distance. But it is what it is, and that's the way it is.
Okay, any other comments from commissioners? Something that Commissioner Aducas would normally point out that I will in editing what's up on the wall here. Let's get rid of the word to in the second sentence. So organizations provide. Okay, that looks good. Okay, do we have any other comments? I can no longer see commissioners. There they are. Any other comments? So I will put that in a motion, what we've been talking about here. Is there a second?
Second.
Commissioner McPhail seconds. Any discussion on the motion? Okay, hearing none, will the clerk please call the roll?
All right, Chair White,
Aye.
Commissioner Aducas,
Aye.
Commissioner McPhail,
Aye.
Commissioner King.
Aye.
All right. Motion moves 4-0.
Okay, great. Let's move on. Item 7, discussion, report by the planning director on board actions and other matters.
Thank you, Chair White. The only thing I have to report on is really looking forward to the next year. It looks like we're already here, 2021, which we're all eager since this has been a tough year. Our next Planning Commission hearing would be on January 14th. At that hearing, your commission will be considering the Somas Ranch Farm Worker Housing Project. And you will be doing a recommendation action on that project that then would move forward to the Board of Supervisors. You'll also be deciding your elections of your chair and vice chair on the 14th. And then for February, we're sort of looking at our calendar here on some projects. So I'm just going to report only on our January date at this time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Director Ward. Next items the Planning Commission commissioners may wish to introduce. Do any commissioners have anything they want to bring up? Commissioner King.
Just want to take the opportunity to wish the best of the season to all my fellow commissioners and staff. I see no other opportunity to do that. It's hard to realize that the holidays are upon us because it doesn't feel like it. Nevertheless, good wishes should be extended to all who work for the benefit of the county.
Thank you for those nice thoughts. Any else? Commissioner McPhail.
Commissioner Dukas had her hand up first.
Okay, Commissioner Dukas.
Okay, I just wanted to ask Commissioner King if he wanted to circle back on what we were talking about before the meeting started.
I'll reserve that discussion for next month.
Okay, then. Thank you, Commissioner McPhail and Commissioner King.
All right, Commissioner McPhail, do you have something to say?
Just ditto what Commissioner King said. Just wish everybody happy holidays, the absolute best, and a Merry Christmas. And I want to thank staff and Director Ward for all the hard work that they've done this year in a very stressful and challenging year with Zoom and some of the problems that we've had. But, you know, it's just Megan and trying to keep us all straight, and our pictures up there and the staff up in the booth that you can't see, and Dave, I assume, still sitting down there somewhere helping, and the people in the back room. You've all done a fantastic job, and hopefully sometime in 2021 we'll all be together and see our smiling faces together. And I wish you all very much the best.
Okay, thank you for that comment. And I would like to add to that I'm very proud of county planning staff and county staff in general. I'm impressed with the competence of what comes before the Planning Commission. I know we've dealt with a lot of very interesting, challenging issues in these last few years. I also wish everybody happy holidays and hope to see you all soon. Any other comments? Commissioner Dukas.
Just one last one. As Commissioner Rodriguez is laid to rest, now his services are today and happening now, and just keeping him in our heart.
Most definitely.
Yes. Okay, thank you. Hearing nothing further, without objection, the meeting is adjourned.